Admiral Vorth stood on the bridge of the Obsidian Will, his 6 clawed hands clasped tightly behind his back. Before him, through the massive reinforced observation window, blazed the star G44, the primary energy source for the 3 industrial crown worlds of the Kravathi Empire. It was a majestic sight, a symbol of the eternal stability and rigid order the Kravathi had maintained for millennia. Then the light flickered. Not a flare, not an eclipse, but a stutter, like a heartbeat skipping in the chest of a god. "Report!" Vorth barked, feeling an inexplicable pressure build in his secondary lungs. What was that fluctuation? Did the Dyson net lose alignment? "Admiral." The communications officer's voice was thin, trembling with a frequency Vorth had never heard. "Sensors are reporting impossible data. The surface tension of the star's photosphere. It's flattening." Vorth narrowed all 4 of his eyes. What he saw defied every law of astrophysics he had studied since the hatchling pits. The spherical silhouette of the star began to warp. The edges, once blurred by the violent churning of solar wind, suddenly snapped into perfectly straight lines. Within seconds, the blazing ball of plasma transformed into a perfect, glowing cube. The sun continued to shine, but the light hit the deck of the flagship at impossible right angles, creating shadows that looked like blocky, jagged pixels on an ancient, low-resolution monitor. "Gravity wave incoming!" the navigator screamed, but he never finished the warning. Gravity on the bridge didn't just fail, it vanished. Not like a power cut, but as if the very concept of down had been deleted from the universe's memory. Officers floated into the air, but instead of drifting smoothly, their bodies began to jitter. They snapped from one position to another in micro-teleports, their physical forms struggling to occupy multiple points in space simultaneously. "Is this an Ethelgard weapon?" Vorth wheezed, lunging for a handrail that now felt flat and cold, more like a digital representation of metal than metal itself. "No, sir," the ship's computer replied, its voice distorted by a digital rasp. "This is not an attack. It is a degradation of the local matrix. The current laws of physics are no longer valid for this sector. Probability of material survival? 0. Across the bridge, holes began to appear in the air. They weren't black holes. They were voids filled with static and white noise. A junior officer accidentally drifted into one, and his arm instantly transformed into a string of random, hexadecimal code before his entire body simply unrendered. He didn't die. He was just no longer part of the scene. "Contact the Galactic Council!" Vorth roared, fighting the nausea of a reality that was failing to load. "Send a distress signal on every frequency. Use the subspace beacons. The Council is already on the line," the officer replied, his face flickering between different colors every few seconds as his biological textures glitched. "They say it's happening everywhere. The Krell Dominion reports a planet has dissolved into 2D triangles. The Ethelgard High King says their stars are turning into flat circles." Vorth watched in horror as his fleet, the most powerful force in the sector, began to dismantle itself. Not from fire or explosions, but because the universe had stopped recognizing them as solid objects. "Someone must know how to stop this!" He bellowed into the static. "Sir!" The officer's voice was filled with a new kind of shock. "We just received a broadcast on the emergency band. It's not from the Council. It's from the Sol sector." The humans. Vorth froze. The humans. Those strange bipedal creatures from the junk sector. A place where physics had always been famously buggy and unpredictable. On the main view screen, cutting through the pixelated distortion, a message appeared in plain, clinical text. RE. Reality Stability Request. We see your ticket. It looks like your sector's local physics driver has crashed. Please do not panic. We are dispatching a junior reality auditor to your location. Expected arrival? 5 minutes. Important. Do not touch anything that is currently glowing blue. Vorth slowly looked down at his own hand. It had just begun to glow with a bright neon blue light. The 5 minutes felt like 5 centuries to Admiral Vorth. Around him, the bridge was becoming a digital graveyard. His tactical officer was now a floating collection of green wireframes, and the secondary sensor array had simply turned into a giant, untextured gray sphere. Vorth's own hand, still glowing that ominous neon blue, felt numb. Not the numbness of cold, but the numbness of an object that the universe had forgotten how to calculate. "Sir, something is approaching." Ven's voice was distorted, sounding like a recording played underwater. Vorth looked at the main view screen, or what was left of it. Space didn't ripple with a warp jump. Instead, a small, boxy vessel that looked suspiciously like a 21st century delivery van with thrusters bolted to the side simply appeared. It didn't arrive. It was suddenly just there, as if someone had dragged and dropped it into the scene. A hatch on the side of the boxy craft hissed open, and a lone human stepped out into the vacuum. She wasn't wearing a high-tech combat suit or a shimmering shield. She was wearing a thick orange jumpsuit with SOL Systems Maintenance, patched onto the shoulder, a pair of rugged boots, and a tool belt. She carried a tablet in one hand and a battered metal thermos in the other. "Oxygen levels at 40% and falling," she muttered, her voice broadcasting clearly through the Kravathi's glitching speakers. "Low-resolution textures, clipping through the floorboards. This is a mess." She stepped onto the bridge of the obsidian will by walking directly through the hull, plating as if it were smoke. "What are you?" Vorth gasped, his voice cracking as his vocal cords struggled to maintain their physical properties. "Sarah, reality support, level 1, she said, tapping her tablet without looking up. She took a sip from her thermos and winced. "Coffee's cold. Typical." She finally looked at Vorth. She didn't bow. She didn't show fear of the 6-armed predator who commanded a fleet. She just sighed. "You're the one glowing blue. Hold still. You're currently suffering from a buffer overflow in your biological data. If I don't patch you in the next 60 seconds, you're going to turn into a stack of sentient error messages." Vorth didn't move. He couldn't. Sarah reached into a pouch on her belt and pulled out a device that looked like a common barcode scanner. She clicked a button, and a red laser swept over Vorth. Instantly, the blue glow vanished. Vorth fell to the deck, the weight of gravity suddenly and violently reasserting itself. He gasped, feeling the glorious, solid coldness of the metal floor. "How?" Vorth managed to choke out. "Our scientists spent centuries mastering the laws of physics. We are the masters of the G44 sector. Mastering the laws?" Sarah snorted, finally looking at the cubic sun outside. "Admiral, you weren't mastering anything. You were just writing the legacy code of a dev environment that should have been deleted a billion years ago. The Sol system, where we come from, is where the creators actually did the work. It's full of bugs, sure, but it's the only place where the source code is actually patched. The rest of the galaxy? You guys are basically running on a pirated trial version." She walked over to the main console and kicked it. Hard. The screen flickered. The cubic sun shuddered, its edges softening, its pixelated flares smoothing out into a blinding spherical radiance. Gravity stabilized. The holes in the air zipped shut like a closing eyelid. "There," Sarah said, checking her tablet. "Temporary patch. It'll hold for a few hours. But your sector is suffering from a cascading script error. Someone in this sector is trying to overclock reality, and it's breaking the server." Vorth stood up, his dignity returning with his physical form. "The Ethel Guard. They have been experimenting with a new God engine in the core. They said it would give them infinite energy." Sarah's expression went from bored to dangerously annoyed. It was that specific human look, the one that preceded the destruction of empires. They're trying to run a God engine on a 32-bit reality? Are they trying to kill everyone? She turned back toward her boxy ship. "I have to get to the core. If that engine finishes its cycle, it won't just be your sun turning into a cube. The entire galaxy is going to blue screen and reset to the Big Bang." Vorth gripped his command chair. "We will go with you. My fleet is at your disposal." Sarah paused at the hull breach she had walked through. "Admiral, your ships are too well-coded. The second we get close to the core, the reality glitches will tear you apart. You can't fight a system error with a sword." She looked back at him, her eyes cold. "But there is one thing you can do. The Ethel Guard have sent a security team to Earth to stop us from fixing the server. They think we're the ones causing the crash." Vorth's mandibles clicked. "Ethel Guard assassins? Against your home?" "Worse," Sarah said, her voice dropping. "They sent the Shatter Guard, and they have no idea that they've just stepped into the one place in the universe where the delete key actually works." High Arbiter Kyle of the Ethel Guard Shatter Guard viewed the Sol system through the lens of divine superiority. To the Ethel Guard, the universe was a song, and they were the conductors. Their ships were composed of harmonic crystal, vibrating at the frequency of creation itself. As they exited slip space near the orbit of Saturn, Kale expected to find a primitive, panicked world. "Report on the human system administrators," Kale commanded, his voice a melodic chime. "The sector is messy, High Arbiter," his first singer replied, 4 eyes blinking in confusion. The gravitational constants here are oscillating. The light from their sun isn't traveling in straight lines, it's taking shortcuts. It's as if the space here was built by a committee that couldn't agree on the blueprints. Kyle scoffed. A junk sector. No wonder the reality auditors originated here. They grew up in the scrap heap of the universe. Prepare the shatter beam. We will delete this source code once and for all, and allow our God engine to rewrite the galaxy in our image. The Ethelgard fleet, a shimmering array of crystalline spires, moved toward the third planet. They ignored the small, blocky satellites orbiting Earth. Satellites that looked like metal boxes held together by primitive welds and hope. Target Earth. Initiate the deletion sequence, Kyle ordered. The shatter beam, a weapon capable of unmaking the molecular bonds of a planet, began to hum. It gathered the pure energy of the vacuum, glowing with a light that should have ended all life in the hemisphere. The beam fired, a blinding white lance of perfect physics. It hit Earth. And then it did something that broke Kyle's mind. The beam didn't explode. It didn't melt the crust. Instead, it hit a point in the upper atmosphere and simply clipped through. The beam emerged on the other side of the planet, missing the core entirely, and sailed harmlessly into deep space. "Recalibrate!" Coyle screamed. "You missed!" "We didn't miss, sir!" the first singer cried, his hands dancing over the vibrating controls. "The humans. They've disabled collision detection in this sector. The planet isn't a solid object to our weapons. It's like firing a ghost at a shadow." Before Kale could process the impossibility of a planet turning off its own physical boundaries, a transmission appeared on his HUD. It wasn't a military officer. It was a teenager with messy hair, sitting in what looked like a bedroom in a place called Ohio. "Hey, guys," the boy said, yawning. "I'm Kevin. I'm a junior Sys-Admin intern. You're currently trespassing in a sandbox zone. You don't have the permissions to execute delete.exe here. Also, your armor is vibrating at a very high frequency. That's a known exploit." "Silence, vermin!" Kyle roared. "Our technology is divine." "Yeah, about that," Kevin said, tapping something on a tablet. "I just changed your armor's material property from harmonic crystal to inflatable plastic. Have a nice flight." Kyle looked down. His legendary crystalline armor, the pride of the Ethelgard Empire, began to lose its glow. It started to sag. It turned a bright neon yellow and made a squeaking sound when he moved. His first singer's sword turned into a long purple balloon. Panic erupted across the Ethelgard fleet. Their ships' once majestic spires began to lose their textures, turning into giant, gray, unrendered blocks. "This is impossible!" Kyle shrieked, his voice high-pitched because Kevin had apparently messed with the local audio drivers, too. "Nothing is impossible when you have the admin password," Kevin said, his face suddenly turning serious. "Now I'm going to kick you from the server. But before I do, you should know. Sarah just reached the core, and she's not as nice as I am." The Obsidian Will and Sarah's delivery van ship appeared on the Shatterguard's sensors, but they weren't traveling toward Earth. They were disappearing into a massive, swirling null zone at the center of the galaxy. Suddenly, Kale's ship began to vibrate. Not with power, but with an error message that appeared in the air in front of him, written in letters of fire. "Critical exception. Unauthorized entity in protected space. Commencing quarantine." Kyle looked out the window as the stars began to blink out one by one. Not because they were dying, but because the server was closing the connection. The Obsidian Will groaned as it slipped into the null zone at the heart of the galaxy. Admiral Vorth stared out the view screen, but he didn't see the usual swirling gases of a supermassive black hole. Instead, the center of the galaxy looked like a colossal, unfinished construction site. Floating pillars of untextured light stretched for light years, and the stars in the distance weren't twinkling. They were flickering in a rhythmic binary pattern. "This is the core?" Vorth whispered, his primary hands trembling. "It looks empty." "It's not empty," Sarah said, her eyes fixed on her tablet. "It's just not being rendered for efficiency. Why waste energy on visuals when there's nobody here to look at it? Or at least there wasn't supposed to be." Directly ahead lay the Ethelgard God Engine. It was a massive crystalline structure built directly into the mainframe of reality. It looked like a beautiful golden cathedral, but to Sarah's eyes it was a parasitic virus. It was siphoning raw data directly from the universe's core to power a Paradise protocol. A localized loop of reality where everything was perfect for the Ethelgard at the cost of everyone else's physics. "We're losing hull integrity," Ven shouted from the navigation console. "The God engine is drawing so much power that our ship's durability variable is dropping to 0. "Deploy the firewall," Sarah commanded. She tapped a command on her tablet. A bubble of green text and symbols erupted around the obsidian will. Suddenly, the ship stopped groaning. On the sensors, the Ethelgard fleet surrounding the God engine looked like a swarm of angry wasps. They weren't glitching, they were shielded by the very engine that was destroying the rest of the galaxy. A holographic projection of the Ethelgard High King, a being of pure, blinding radiance, appeared on their bridge. "Cease your approach, scavengers of Sol," the king thundered. "We have achieved the divine ascension. We are rewriting the song of creation. You are but a discordance that must be silenced." "You're not rewriting the song. You're causing a memory leak," Sarah snapped, not even looking up. "You've opened so many Paradise instances that the galaxy's RAM is at 99%. If I don't shut you down, the whole server is going to crash, and your divine ascension is going to end in a permanent shutdown." "Blasphemy!" the king roared. "The engine is perfect." "The engine is a poorly written macro," Sarah countered. She turned to Vorth. "Admiral, I need you to draw their fire. Your ships are well-coded enough to survive for 3 minutes if I give you an administrative shield. I need to get inside the God Engine's control room and pull the plug." 3 minutes, Vorth asked, his mandibles clicking. "Against the entire Ethelgard Golden Fleet? 2 minutes and 50 seconds if you want me to have enough time to save your son from being a cube permanently," Sarah added. Vorth straightened his uniform. "Admiral to all ships. Form a defensive sphere around the Auditor's craft. We might be well-coded, but let's show these divine fools that we're also very hard to delete." As the obsidian will charged into the golden swarm, Sarah's boxy delivery van ship detached and accelerated toward the heart of the God engine. She ignored the explosions and the beams of perfect light splashing against her green firewall. She reached the crystalline surface and didn't slow down. She simply adjusted the phase of her ship and drove directly through the solid golden walls. Inside, the God engine was a nightmare of recursive logic. Thousands of Ethelgard priests were plugged into the walls, their minds acting as sub-processors for the machine. In the center sat the kernel, a floating white sphere that held the master code for the sector. Sarah stepped out of her ship, her boots echoing on the digital floor. She walked toward the kernel, but a figure blocked her path. It was the Ethelgard's chief architect, his body partially phased into the machine. "You cannot stop it, Auditor," the architect said, his voice echoing from everywhere at once. "The engine has already begun the final compile. In 60 seconds, reality will be ours." Sarah didn't reach for a gun. She reached for a small, dusty device in her pocket, a 1990s-era mechanical keyboard. She plugged it into a port on the wall and looked at the architect with a look of pure, professional exhaustion. "You guys really should have checked the terms of service before you started this," Sarah said. "Because I'm not here to argue. I'm here to initiate a force quit." She hit a key. The golden cathedral suddenly turned a flat, unshaded gray. The paradise light vanished. And then a new sound began to fill the room. A deep, rhythmic thudding that sounded like the heartbeat of a very large, very angry machine. "What is that?" the architect whispered, his eyes widening in terror. "That's not me," Sarah said, her face turning pale as she looked at her tablet. "That's the system recovery agent. It thinks the God engine is a virus when it thinks we're part of it." A massive, shadowy figure began to manifest above the kernel, its eyes glowing with the red light of a critical error message. The temperature in the heart of the God engine didn't just drop. It ceased to be a measurable variable. The shadow manifesting above the kernel was a void in the shape of a titan, its surface rippling with the red, jagged lines of a critical exception error. This was the system recovery agent, the universe's automated immune system. It didn't have a conscience, and it didn't care about divine ascension. It saw the Ethelgard's God engine as a malignant tumor, and it saw Sarah and Vorth as part of the infection. "Purge initiated," the agent's voice rumbled, sounding like 1,000 hard drives crashing at once. A wave of red energy swept across the chamber. The Ethelgard priests, still plugged into the walls, didn't even have time to scream. Their physical forms simply pixelated into gray ash and were sucked into the floorboards of reality. The chief architect fell to his knees, his golden skin graying as the texture was stripped from his body. "Sarah, do something!" Admiral Vorth's voice crackled through her earpiece, desperate and distorted. Outside, the obsidian will was being pummeled as the physics around them began to collapse into safe mode. Sarah didn't panic. She didn't reach for a weapon. She sat down on the floor, crossed her legs, and began typing on her mechanical keyboard with a speed that blurred her fingers. The rhythmic click of plastic keys was the only sound against the roaring void of the system recovery agent. "I'm not a virus, you overgrown firewall," Sarah shouted at the shadow. "I'm an auditor. Check the Sol system registry." The red giant paused, its massive hand, a claw of flickering static, stopping inches from Sarah's head. Its glowing red eyes scanned her, a beam of light moving from her boots to her messy ponytail. "Query. Sol Sector Registry," the agent boomed. Result: Sector 001. Status: Protected Development Environment. Entity identified: Sarah Jenkins. Role: Junior System Administrator. Probationary. The red light around Sarah turned to a neutral, steady amber. The agent retracted its hand, but the pressure in the room remained suffocating. "Warning," the agent continued. "Redundant hardware detected. The Ethelgard God engine is corrupting the core kernel. Automated deletion of Sector G44 is scheduled in T-120 seconds to preserve global system stability." "Wait, you're deleting the whole sector?" Sarah stood up, her eyes wide. "That's 3 industrial worlds and billions of lives. You can't just factory reset a quadrant because of one bad engine." "Efficiency is paramount," the agent replied. "Reboot is the only stable path." "The hell it is," Sarah muttered. She turned to her keyboard, her eyes scanning the scrolling lines of code on her tablet. "If I can manually isolate the God Engine's process ID and kill it without crashing the kernel, will you cancel the reboot?" "Unsupported operation. Risk of system crash, 94%. "I like those odds," Sarah said, a grim, professional smile touching her lips. "Vorth, I need you to do something incredibly stupid. The agent is about to flush the cache. I need you to fly the obsidian will directly into the primary power intake of the God engine. It's going to cause a massive logic bomb. It'll freeze the system for exactly 4 seconds. You want me to ram a God engine?" Vorth asked, his voice sounding surprisingly steady. "I want you to overflow it," Sarah corrected. "Do it now, or everyone you know is getting deleted." On the view screen of her tablet, Sarah watched the obsidian will ignite its thrusters, a tiny speck of legacy code, charging toward the golden cathedral of the gods. As the ship made impact, the reality in the room stuttered. The red giant froze. The static stopped. Sarah slammed her finger onto the enter key. The God engine didn't explode. It simply turned transparent, then wireframe, then vanished. But as the golden light faded, Sarah saw something behind the kernel that made her heart stop. It wasn't just a machine. There was a door. A physical wooden door, standing in the middle of the digital white void. And on the door, written in a child's handwriting, were the words, "Do not open. The bugs are still inside." The system recovery agent suddenly flickered from red to a terrifying, absolute black. "Security breach," it whispered, its voice no longer mechanical but sounding like a terrified human child. They saw the door. The absolute blackness of the system recovery agent felt like a heavy blanket over the core. It wasn't attacking anymore. It was vibrating in place, its red error lights replaced by a frantic, rhythmic pulsing of white circles. The loading icon of a mind trying to process a paradox. "Sarah, get out of there!" Admiral Vorth's voice was a jagged shard of static. "The Ethelgard fleet they're just gone. The agent didn't destroy them. It unexisted them. You're standing in the middle of a deletion zone." Sarah didn't look at her tablet. She stared at the wooden door. It was made of oak, slightly weathered, with a brass knob that looked remarkably ordinary. In a universe of crystalline God engines and obsidian warships, this was the most terrifying thing she had ever seen. It was too real for the simulation. "It's a hard-coded gate," Sarah whispered, her hand hovering inches from the brass. "The Ethelgard thought they were the masters of the house. They didn't realize they were just living in the guest room. This is the basement." "Access is prohibited," the agent whispered, its voice now sounding like a choir of children. "The bugs were confined for the stability of the build. If the door opens, the source code is compromised." "We aren't the bugs, are we?" Sarah asked, her voice steady. She looked at the child's handwriting on the wood. "Humans didn't evolve in the Sol system. We were the ones who built the door from the inside to keep the rest of you out." She realized why physics in the Sol sector was so buggy. It wasn't because it was broken. It was because humans were constantly rewriting the rules to keep the system from seeing them. They weren't the junk sector. They were the developers who had forgotten their own password. "Sarah, don't!" Vorth screamed. "If you open that, the annoyance protocol won't matter. There won't be a galaxy left to protect." Sarah gripped the knob. It felt warm, real. "Vorth, the God Engine already cracked the seal. If I don't open it and fix the leak, the agent is going to delete the entire G44 sector to sanitize the area. I have to go in." "They are waiting!" the agent sobbed, its black form beginning to dissolve into ink-like droplets. "The originals. The ones who don't need code to exist." Sarah turned the knob. It clicked. A sound louder than a supernova in the silent void. The door creaked open, revealing not a room, but a blinding, analog sunlight that made her digital sensors scream in agony. From the other side, a voice reached out. It wasn't binary, it wasn't telepathic. It was a human voice, ancient and echoing. "Took you long enough, Sarah, we're running out of coffee." Sarah stepped through the threshold, and the wooden door slammed shut behind her, vanishing from the core entirely. Sarah stepped through the wooden door and was instantly hit by a sensation she hadn't felt in years. The smell of roasting coffee and old, dusty paper. There was no white void here. No binary code. No humming crystals. She was standing in a cluttered, sun-drenched office. 3 people sat around a large oak table littered with empty pizza boxes and crumpled sketches. They were wearing faded t-shirts and jeans. One man was focused on a crossword puzzle. A woman was asleep with her head on a keyboard. "Is the G44 leak patched?" the man asked, not looking up. Sarah blinked, her hand still on the brass doorknob. "Who are you, and why does this look like a tech startup in Palo Alto?" "We're the ones who forgot to turn the lights off," the woman said, waking up and stretching. She looked exactly like Sarah, only older, with more gray in her hair. "We built the simulation as a legacy project. Earth was supposed to be the nursery, the place where the code could evolve naturally until it was ready to take over the maintenance. The Ethelgard almost crashed the whole server," Sarah said, her voice rising. "Billions of people almost unexisted because they found a God engine. Why didn't you intervene?" The man finally looked up. "We can't. We're out of bounds. If we touch the code now, the whole thing collapses. That's why we left the back doors in the Sol system. We needed someone from the inside, a bug that grew a brain, to do the dirty work." Sarah looked at a small monitor on the wall. It showed the obsidian will frozen in the safe mode, red light of the core. Admiral Vorth looked like a still photograph, his face twisted in a silent scream. "Save them," Sarah demanded, pointing at the screen. "You have the permissions. Fix the sector." The woman sighed and pushed a laptop towards Sarah. "The hardware is ancient, Sarah. The God engine caused a permanent memory leak. We can't fix it from here without hitting delete all. But you can. You're already part of the runtime." She slid a small silver USB drive across the table. It was labeled root_access. "If you plug that into the kernel, you won't just be an auditor anymore," the man warned. "You'll be the system administrator. You'll have to manage every star, every gravity well, and every annoying divine species that tries to overclock their sun. You can never come back to the break room." Sarah looked at the silver drive, then back at the door leading to the dying galaxy. She thought of Vorth, the square sun, and the billion lives currently hovering over a recycle bin. She grabbed the drive. "I've been dealing with annoying species my whole career. This is just a bigger ticket queue." She turned back to the wooden door. As she grabbed the handle, the man called out one last thing. "One more thing, Sarah. When you get back, tell the Kravathi to stop trying to divide by 0. It's making the fans in here run way too loud." Sarah stepped back into the white void, the silver drive glowing in her hand. Sarah stepped back through the wooden door, the silver root_access drive humming in her palm. The white void of the core was still trembling, the black shadow of the system recovery agent hovering over the flickering kernel. Outside, in the safe mode darkness, Admiral Vorth and his fleet were seconds away from being permanently deleted. "Permission granted," Sarah whispered. She slammed the drive into the kernel's primary port. A shockwave of pure white code erupted from the center, moving faster than light. It didn't destroy, it re-rendered. The black shadow of the antivirus didn't fight back. It simply bowed and dissolved into a steady, blue, system-idle glow. Across the galaxy, the square sun G44 snapped back into a perfect sphere. The pixelated shadows on the obsidian will smoothed into high-definition reality. Gravity returned to normal. The holes in space zipped shut. The Ethelgard God Engine, however, didn't survive the patch. It was flagged as malware and systematically erased from the directory, leaving the High King standing in a completely empty throne room, his divine power replaced by a standard-issue physics package. "Sarah, are you there?" Vorth's voice came through, crystal clear and no longer distorted. "The sensors, everything is green. It's like the universe just took a deep breath." "I'm here, Admiral," Sarah said, her eyes watching the scrolling data on her tablet. The junior status on her ID was gone, replaced by a simple, terrifying word: Administrator. "The leak is patched. The simulation is stable." "What happens now?" Vorth asked. "Now," Sarah said, looking at the silent wooden door that was slowly fading into the background of the code. "We update the terms of service." She opened a global broadcast, her voice reaching every mind, every ship, and every crystalline palace in the galaxy. "This is Reality support. The divine experiment is over. From now on, the Sol system is the official moderator for this sector. If you try to overclock your stars, if you try to exploit the physics, or if you ever try to touch the kernel again, your permissions will be revoked. Permanently." Sarah sat down at the center of the core, her tablet glowing with the power to move galaxies. She wasn't an auditor anymore. She was the one who kept the fans running. "And, Admiral," Sarah added, a small smile on her face, "tell your crew to enjoy the high-res textures. I just boosted the resolution for everyone."